To truly know freedom is to know peace, is to know peace, and to stop lying to yourselves and to stop lying to yourselves about who and what you always have been, about who and what you have always been will claim you in the truth of who you are, will claim you in the truth of who you are. The teacher becomes truth. The teacher becomes truth and the divine self, and the divine self, which is truth, is how you navigate a reality, is how you navigate a reality. I'm saying period.
What's up, guys, and welcome to another Mind and Heart opening episode on Just Tap In. I'm your host, Emilio, and today we are completely shattering beliefs and uncovering what the heck is going on in the world right now with one of the most sought after and foremost spiritual channels working today. Planet Earth is anchoring in a new consciousness right now, and as conscious beings, we are downloading these new ways of being. Humanity is being assisted by many higher dimensional beings, and there are people in the world who we call channels that act as bridges for this guidance. Paul Selig is one of the most potent mediums and channels that is bringing through incredible information for humanity. In this conversation, we had the extraordinary gift of hearing from the beings and teachers that come through Paul, who have been commonly known as the guides. An experience in 1987, which we'll explore in this episode, unlocked Paul's clairvoyance and healing gifts. Then he was instructed to channel what now have become more than 10 ongoing books from the guides that are providing a new paradigm to lift humanity to the kingdom, an evolutionary leap in the species consciousness where we awaken to our truest divine nature and ultimately leaving fear behind as our old teacher and uplifting us through truth and love. I trust that we may receive the wisdom and attunements in this conversation with an open mind and heart, and that we allow the skeptical mind to shift to curiosity. Paul will channel in this episode, and when he does, know that he is accessing information from higher entities, which he will rapidly mumble as the transmission comes through, and then he will repeat the words. This conversation and the teachings of the guides have had a profound impact on my journey, and my hope is that for you it will as well. If something that Paul said touched your heart, the most honorable act that you can do is to share this episode with the people you love and your community. You can help us spread this wisdom even further by clicking thumbs up on this video right now, and make sure that you're subscribed to this channel for more conversations with the world's most influential teachers. As Deepak Chopra calls this, the most authentic, straightforward truth straight from the source field. Enjoy this episode with Paul Selig and the guides. Paul Selig, welcome to the podcast, brother. How are you?
I'm well. Thank you for having me.
I'm so excited to be here with you. I just wanted to thank you. I just told you before starting recording that I admire the way that you show up and the way that you show up to do this highly important work in the world right now. As you've been saying in your books, and maybe people who are tuning into you for the first time, they may not be familiar with channeling and the way that you do it, and I'd really invite people to just not think of it intellectually or logically. Just open up your mind and your heart to whatever information your soul may need in this moment. I don't want to go too deep into like how the channeling started, all that, because I know that you've told the story many times, and I just really want to focus on how can we uplift humanity in this moment right now. The guides have been saying that we're going through a time of reckoning. And I just wanted to begin by asking you, what is going on in the world right now? What are we seeing? All these changes, all this violence, all of this transformation and transition. What is going on in the world right now?
Well, the guides, dictated their first book through me in 2009. It was called I Am the Word. And that's the book where they said humanity is at a time of reckoning. And they said a reckoning is a facing of oneself and all of one's creations, and that everything that's been created in fear is going to need to be reseen and recreated in a higher way, and that would likely involve the dissolution of structures that we've known, and we've counted on or thought would always be there. And they're certainly not teaching Armageddon. They are teaching great change and always have. And a lot of their instruction over the past, there's 10 books now, the 10th is out soon, have really been about how we navigate our own awareness of our inherent divinity as a way to move through these changes. They talk about it as a wave of change. And, many of the things that we thought would not be moved are being moved by this wave, and there's different ways to attend to it. The hardest way, I think, is to try to grab on to the known and hold fast, because I think the known, as we've agreed to it collectively, a collective agreement to what should be there, is actually in transition. I don't get that any of this is comfortable, especially for the personality self. I do get that it's necessary. A number of years ago, it was before the election where Trump was elected, they started talking about, was the Book of Truth was the book they dictated then. They said, what's about to happen is that everything that's been buried is about to be revealed. And if you imagine that your backyard is an archaeological dig, it's, what was buried 3 months ago and 3,000 years ago, it's all coming up. It doesn't come up so it can be shamed and made wrong. It comes up because it has to be seen. Nothing really changes until it's revealed or brought to the light. And so this is part of the opportunity and the real uncomfortability, I think, that we've been in. They talk a lot, in recent books about what we're going through and how to attend to the changes that we're undergoing through consciousness. It's not a teaching of passivity. They say if you see, a fight on the street, stop the fight. If you're able to stop the fight, you take action in the real world, but they do say that we're living in a collective reality. They call it an octave of reality, and an octave is comprised of low and high notes. And what we experience and what we see is a collective agreement to what is. And the work of the guides has really been to lift us to what they call it the upper room, or the next octave up, where things can be altered. It's a process of transposition. If you think of a song that can be sung in one octave and then sung in a higher, when you sing in the higher, when you begin operating from the higher, you're no longer entrenched in fear. And they say we've been operating in an agreement to fear because it's the reality that we've been born into. And so much of what we see is sort of, I would say, indoctrinated by fear, or was created with an imprinting of fear that we don't even think of it as such. Sometimes they talk about it as if we've been sort of, jumped into born into the swimming pool that somebody peed in before we got there, and we don't even know it, so we can go to the higher. And that's what they're teaching us to do. They say that humanity is evolving. And they've said it's going to take a few generations for things to coalesce. Yeah. But they're saying that we really can't exist as we have because we've created the means for our own self-destruction. And they say that humanity at a higher level has chosen to move beyond that. We can't move beyond that if we're replicating what we've known. And we've been at war since, the first time somebody learned to pick up a rock and throw it. So until we move to a level of consciousness where war isn't an option or a possibility, we're going to have it. And as long as we have it, we're going to be in trouble. So I sometimes think we're seeing what happens kind of when you pour clean water into a dirty glass and the silt from the bottom rises up to the top to be seen. And that's sometimes, I think, the mess that we're seeing.
Yeah. And on an individual level, I think a lot of people are becoming aware of maybe some of the aspects that they had been ignoring about themselves for a long time.
Yeah, it happens, I think, at the level of the individual and at the level of the collective. I think it's actually the same process. I personally believe that if we're willing to go through this at the level of the individual, we won't have to see it outpictured quite so much. If we deal with our own fear, we're going to stop creating from it. The guides I work with say that the action of fear is to claim more fear, and every choice we make in fear gets more of the same. So when we do our inner work, we're giving ourselves permission, I think, to choose in a higher and different way.
Yeah. And I've also heard the guides speak into when one person awakens, you awaken thousands more just by the new vibrational alignment, your presence that you bring nowadays after this awakening. And in the book, The Kingdom, the last book the new one is coming out, The Resurrections, but the most recent one that is out, The Kingdom, it says that the guides had told us that this is not the first time that humanity has reconciled to uplift and go to this upper room. What can you speak into regarding that it's not the first time?
They haven't talked much about it, truthfully. I'd have to go to them. It's the kind of stuff when they teach that I grow uncomfortable. Let me see if they want to say, I'm going to see if I can do this. I'm on my second cup of coffee today. I don't know what happened, guys. They're saying the young man wants to know what happened in the past. In the past, what's actually happening in the present, what's happening in the past. What is actually happening in the present is what has happened in the past. In some ways, you replicate ideas. In some ways, you replicate ideas until you truly learn them, in the species itself. And the species itself has ascended at different times in history, beyond the form that you've known thus far, beyond the form that you have known thus far. They're saying the form that you have taken now is actually an agreement to transition. When a species evolves, it takes on what it requires. It takes on what it requires to reclaim itself in a broader or higher way. This has happened prior. Will likely happen again, but it's a different manifestation. Of a reality and of humanity than you know of as present today. So whatever that means. Let me see if they want to say anything. What I get about this is that we've done this before. It's not new to us. The inherent divine, they say, is present always in us. They've talked about Atlantis briefly, but I think is something that didn't work, so I hope we're not there again. Yeah. But they've said, we've been around much, much longer than we think. And I've also heard from them that it's not always been with bodies. We've operated in other ways. The beings that we are, the energy that you are has shown up differently.
And being incarnated, would this be truthful to say that being incarnated right now in this time in humanity, going through this great transition, I know when you were beginning to get into these topics, you heard about the harmonic convergence, which is also a little bit about like this collective awakening. The question I wanted to ask was, when we are transitioning now to the upper room, what in that upper room is different than what we may be experiencing right now in our present reality? What is the biggest difference there?
Well, what I understand about that is that we're operating without fear, is that we're not using fear as the motor or the way we use to make our decisions or choose our lives. The guides talk about the small self as the personality structure. And they say there's nothing wrong with it. It's an aspect of who we are. It's an important part of who we are. I guess you could call it the ego, although they don't use that word often. But they say that the personality structure knows itself through history. That's really all it knows. It knows what it's been shown and what it's been taught. They say that the true self, which is the eternal aspect of each of us, knows itself in a higher way. The upper room, they say, is really just where that aspect of us already resides. So we're aligning to the aspect of us that is already so. They say you can't make anything holy, but you can deny the divinity in anything that you want to. And they say that our primary challenge on this plane is what they call the denial of the divine. So what I understand about the upper room is it's a level of consciousness where how you perceive and what you perceive is informed by the presence of the divine. So they say, God sees God in all of its creations. It's we at this lower level that operate through this belief in separation. And when you lift higher, you don't. Sometimes when I do workshops, the guides, because they work with energetic attunements that lift the reader and lift the student.
And it's definitely palpable. It's felt.
Yeah.
You can, when you're reading
Yeah.
these books, it's incredible, the energetic shift that you feel.
Yeah, well, the books are energetic transmissions, and they work. It's imprinted. It's in the language, and it's what lives between the lines on the page. The guides say, but when they do this in workshops, they've been known to bring everybody up to the upper room, and then they say to them, "And what are you afraid of?" And nobody's frightened, And I have lived a frightened life in many ways, And for me to be operating without that at times in long periods of time is fairly astonishing to me, that everything isn't informed by that. I still have the buttons that get pushed and the triggers, and those are the things that I still get to work on, that I still have attachment to. But my experience of the upper room is probably less than it truly can be. I mean, they say the upper room is the entryway to the kingdom in some ways. And they say that the kingdom is the awareness of the inherent divine in all manifestation. And that's where you actually begin to move beyond what things have been named as or claimed as, and hold the meaning that has been endowed it in the lower collective realm. So, our idea of everything, they say, is made new. How we see is made new, and our position as the one who's operating at that level of tone or vibration, which they say has its own accord, claims all things to it at that level. So they say it's how a world is transformed, is by operating at this level. They say simply, what you damn and who you damn damns you back, and what you bless blesses you in return. It's a real simple teaching.
Very simple.
But to bless something is to see the presence of the divine upon it, even when it appears to the contrary, which can transform it. It's not, putting a happy face sticker on it, or, painting it pink and saying it's pretty. It's not about bypassing, it's about reclamation. Because, it holds this idea that God must be all things, finally. And by God, they don't mean some old man in a cloud, but the energy that is source energy must permeate all things. And the recognition of it is actually the act of reclamation, is actually what lifts what you encounter.
Yeah.
Whereas when you damn something, it's the opposite. It's just they say what you put in darkness calls you to the darkness. It's really that simple.
Yeah. When I first started becoming a student of this work, a lot of my belief systems about spirituality, were getting questioned. For a long time, I had also been a student of Neil Donald Walsh's work, Conversations with God. And in those books, I learned that we're essentially living in this realm of relativity, this dualistic reality where there's light, there exists dark. And to know the light, you have to learn from the darkness. And a question, because it made me when I was getting into the guide's work, I was like, so they're saying that in the upper room there is no fear, but how can we learn what is the opposite of fear without fear? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, kind of. I think I do. So the guides say that all things are of God, everything. And the question that was posed to them once was then, well, what about fear? And they say, well, fear is also of God. It just denies it. It just denies it. So the action of fear is to deny the divine, or the light, or the presence of the divine. They don't talk ever about pretending something isn't there. It's not about saying something wasn't painful, or something wasn't cruel, or something wasn't tragic. They say that we are accountable to all of our choices at an individual and collective level. That's our job. You break it, you buy it. It's karma. It's just how it works. But my understanding, and this is the only way I understand it, and I could be wrong, I'm not a spiritual teacher, I'm not a guru. I sit in a chair, I close my eyes, these books are spoken through me, and then somebody transcribes them, and that's what's published. That's like my job. But when they said something about war, and they said, as long as you hold that level of vibrational consciousness, as long as you're in the expectation of war, you're going to get it. But if you move to a level of consciousness where war is not present, where it cannot be chosen, it stops being something that's enacted upon. And that's, I suspect, where they're bringing us, because otherwise I think we're going to be putting Band-Aids on things. I mean, they say that we believe that peace is the absence of war, but then we've made our idea of peace in some kind of equivalency to violence. Well, as long as I don't have violence, I can know peace. My understanding of the upper room is you're not. Let me ask them, because it's a really interesting question. It's actually very important, but they're saying it's actually a very important question. While there is no fear in the upper room, while there is no fear in the upper room, you are not denying that expresses in the lower field in the lower field. When you are in the upper room, when you are in the upper room, you become a translator of reality. You become the translator of reality. In other words, you're encounter. In other words, you are lifting what you encounter by nature of presence and being. By nature of presence and being. Presence and being is important. And presence and being is important to understand. The one who knows who he is, the one who knows who he is, knows his or her own divinity, knows his or her own divinity, knows it for all things, knows it for all things. The one who claims the light in the face of darkness, the one who claims the light in the face of darkness is actually transmuting and translating, is actually transmuting and translating the darkness. It is not a denial. It is not a denial. It's a reclamation. It's a reclamation. There is a vast difference between reclaiming something. There is a vast difference between reclaiming something and pretending it's not there and pretending it is not there. The teaching of duality and separation. The teaching of duality and separation, while important is only one piece of a puzzle, is only one piece of a puzzle. The idea of union is not present in the teaching. The idea of union is not present in that teaching. And by union, we don't mean you don't experience pain. And by union, we don't mean you don't experience pain, or you don't suffer, or you don't suffer. If you're stuck in a blizzard, you may get cold. If you are stuck in a blizzard, you may get cold. Put your hand, probably will burn. If you put your hand at a fire, you will burn. But to understand the sense of completeness that comes through an idea of union, which by its own nature is darkness, which by its own nature dispels the darkness, offers you a way of being that is actually contrary to much of what you've been instructed in, to much of what you have been instructed in. When you rise in octave or vibration, the tethers you hold to the lower, are claimed anew, and ultimately released. We're not bound to the old. When you are no longer bound to the old, you stop experiencing as you thought it should be. You stop experiencing it as you thought it should be, period. And they're saying period.
Wow. I wrote down when they said it tethers you, the tethers we hold to the lower. Mm-hmm. And that really stood out to me, because it's almost as if we're in agreement to this lower nature. We're in agreement to this fear. And fear has been, humanity's teacher for many, many years. It's how the way I kind of see it, like as an imagery, it's like we're changing the teacher. Like we're firing the old teacher. Yeah. We're bringing in a new teacher. What does the new teacher look like for humanity now?
Nobody's asked this. It's the truth of who you are. It's the truth of who you are when you start embodying as truth. When you start embodying as the truth of who you are, you have great access to truth. You have great access to truth, not subjective truth, which is mostly your opinion, what is always true, but what is always true, which is your true nature, the inherent divine that expresses manifestation, and the inherent divine that expresses as manifestation. So Paul asked, what is the teacher? So Paul asked, what is the teacher? Well, it is always your own experience. Well, it is always your own experience. You learn through being, and the alteration of the old, and the alteration of the old, or the shifting beyond the old ties, is a process you are now undergoing to truly know freedom. To truly know freedom is to know peace, and to stop lying to yourselves. And to stop lying to yourselves about who and what you always have been, about who and what you have always been, will claim you in the truth of who you are, will claim you in the truth of who you are. The teacher becomes truth. The teacher becomes truth, and the divine self, which is truth, is how you navigate a reality, I'm saying period.
You mentioned earlier in the conversation that, this happens to all of us, that when we create things in fear, we live a lifestyle that's not in alignment to that true nature, to that true self. And in a previous interview that I heard, the guide said that spirit will use a crisis as an open doorway. And I wanted to get into a little bit of that, because what I feel and what I perceive, and you go on the news and it looks like humanity is like a crisis, but this is a shifting of perception of we're opening a gateway for spirit essentially to come in.
I get that that's accurate. I mean, they've used a lot of metaphors. They've talked about, when a seed sprouts, it moves the earth. Things are being displaced in growth. I don't get that this is a comfortable process. I don't, I get, though, and I could be mistaken, that it can hold more grace if we allow for the potential for the change to be positive. And I don't mean that means that one is supposed to agree with what happens and say, well, I'm going to just be, I'll do what I'm told and this is how things are and so what. I think if one is moved to action, one operates that way. It's when the guide said, if you see a fight, you can break up the fight if you have the means to. So I think everything has to be looked at now as opportunity, real opportunity. I think that's it. I mean, the guides have said you really can't be a victim and a master at the same time. And that doesn't mean that hard things don't happen or that people aren't victimized. They are. But it does mean how we self-identify as, I don't know, the actor, the agent, who's present in this shared landscape, and what we can bring to it to hold something higher, to hold a higher vision. If somebody doesn't hold the higher vision, I don't know that anything positive happens. I really don't.
I love that you said that we have to hold a vision of what can be created through this new era. And have you, in your conversations with the guides and in the writings, have they laid out a specific vision that we're going to be seeing for the years ahead?
I don't think so. I think, there are things that I get uncomfortable with when they teach. And I know that the work that they're delivering through me now is something I wouldn't have been able to wrap my brain around 9 years ago. I mean, some of this stuff now I'm just blown away by and challenged by. They've been fairly on target in the last 10 years of instruction with sort of preparing us for what's happened.
Yeah.
What's in our face now. I mean, the books are really a good way to sort of look at a roadmap of the last decade in terms of what we experience collectively as outpictured or manifest in a landscape. Let me ask if there's anything that they want to say about this, if you don't mind. It's just these are questions 100%. That I don't have the answers for, and that's when I go, I don't know what to say. I'd like to say only one thing. We would like to say only one thing. The path before you is prepared by you. The path before you is prepared by you. How you treat each other, how you treat each other, how you care for each other, how you care for each other, how you see each other, how you see each other will actually shepherd you through this transition, will actually shepherd you through this transition. If you harm your brother, sister, if you harm your brother or sister, if you are self-righteous in your behavior, if you are self-righteous in your behavior, busy damning those beside you, if you are busy damning the ones beside you, will have a very hard road. You will have a very hard road, and this is promised by you, and this is promised by you through your own behavior, and your own choice to exclude the divine that we say is always present, that we say is always present in another, regardless of what they present as, regardless of what they present as. If you wish an easier journey, become willing to shift beyond an idea of separation, beyond an idea of separation, us versus them, and you become so entrenched in that you have become so entrenched in. Even this is an opportunity to know unity. Even this is an opportunity to know unity. Paul interrupts. Paul interrupts, what does the path look like? But what does the path look like? Again, it depends on how you choose. Again, it depends on how you choose. When there is less obstruction to lifting, when there is less obstruction to lifting, when there is less of a mandate of fear, when there is less of a mandate of fear, the shifting comes quite easily. The shifting comes quite easily when you have a gun on your back. When you have a gun on your back and a knife and a boulder in your hand and a knife and a boulder in your hands, you are weighed down. You are weighed down. You are operating in fear. You are operating in fear and anticipation and an anticipation of great struggle. The times are changing. The times are changing. The less you carry, the better off you are. The less you carry, the better off you are. If you're prepared for battle, if you are prepared for battle, you always find a war to fight. You will always find a war to fight if you lift a level of tone. If you lift to a level of tone where war does not express, you can lift the players on the battlefield. You can lift the players on the battlefield and the idea of battle itself. And the idea of battle itself, what we call the upper room, to what we call the upper room, which is the Christ consciousness, which is the Christ consciousness, or the level of vibration, that a human may hold, but a human may hold while maintaining form, period. And they're saying period.
My mind is going in all different directions right now. And I wanted to just speak into one concept that I read in the Kingdom that said that when we're lifting in vibration, we essentially have to release the density or the form. And when I read that, I was trying to wrap my head around it, and I couldn't really understand what does that actually look like to release density. If you've thought about it, or if the guys want to step into maybe explain a little bit in depth.
I'll try first, and then I may not answer it correctly, and then they'll usually correct me, or you can re-ask the question in another way. When they were dictating, I think it was Book of Truth, that was the first time they started unpacking the teaching, I know what I am in truth. The decree was, I know who I am in truth, I know what I am in truth, I know how I serve in truth. And, when this first came through, I was doing a little group that met in my apartment. I'm plugging the power in. And we all thought we understood, I know who I am, which was the inherent divine. What? We thought, well, that's just the lives we live, and that's just what it means to be ourselves. And how we serve, we mistakenly thought was, well, what we do. Yeah. Like, you have a podcast, what we do is how we serve. And we had it somewhat backwards. So I know who I am, which is the reclamation of the inherent divine, was accurate. I know what I am was actually the manifestation of that in form. God as form, the divine as form. They say if you deny the holiness in your own form, you've also denied it in everything in the physical realm. You've denied God in body. You've also denied God as the sea, as the sky, and all things. And to illustrate this, they took all of their students out. This was at the Esalen Institute in Big Sur, onto the lawn, and they split them into two groups and had them about maybe 40 feet apart. And they had people working in partners where they would say to one another, I know who you are in truth, I know what you are in truth. And then the repetition or the focus on I know what you are in truth. And then ask them to feel what came back to them. And they taught this thing called the echo. And when you claim the inherent divinity in something, I know what you are in truth, you actually could feel the waves of energy returning to you. And that was kind of a trip. And it was the beginning of the teaching of alchemy, which is where they've been at for a while, and how a world is made new. So the idea of blessing something, I think it's become perfunctory. I grew up an atheist, so we used to see people praying in restaurants and roll our eyes when we were kids. It's like that was for those stupid people. But I understand that it means something very different, which was claiming the inherent presence of the divine that must be there, which they say actually alters the thing, the object. It shifts its vibration. The idea of lifting in form is actually, I think, becoming less dense, as they say. But if you think of it quite simply as like a big helium balloon with a basket that people can ride in, How that balloon lifts is by dropping the sandbags or dropping the excessive weight. In this case, the excessive weight, I suspect, is the lower vibrational stuff that we've accrued and consequently aligned to. You see, we're aligned to everything that we see, high, low, and in between.
Yeah, and just to give people some of my personal experience, I've talked about this very briefly on the podcast about, I went to a Dr. Joe Dispenza retreat in Cancun this year. And, Dr. Joe, he's always talking about a lot of these, mystical teachings, alchemy as well. And he always tells us to keep one foot in the 3D and one foot in the 5D. And we're talking about dimensional planes. And during those weeks, or during that week that I was at that week-long retreat, the energy in the room, and everyone is meditating, and we're all, aligning to this higher, what I believe is a higher room, maybe not the upper room, but a higher room. And everyone shares the same sentiment that we feel much more lighter, like not so dense in reality as you would in your normal day in your house. You have to go walk your dog, and like some of these things feel very dense. Or people have reported in psychedelic experiences that they have to ground themselves because, in a sense, their awareness is much more spacious. It's much more expanded. That's kind of how I, when I learned about releasing in density, that's kind of a way that I use to maybe understand it, wrap my head around it.
I think that's part of it. I also think that the senses become refined in a higher way because we know ourselves through form. And so our experience of the world as we see it and perceive it is also altered through this. The guides say that the true self exists, in the upper room, but it also knows itself in form through us. So it's present in eternity. The true self is the eternal self, but, it's also known through you or through me, and we're operating in this idea of a construct of linear time. Mm-hmm. And so, head in the clouds, feet on the ground is one way to do it. And I think that's really true. It's not about escaping reality. It is about, I suspect, reknowing, and the guides say the true self knows, and the small self or the personality self thinks. And there's a vast knowing. And when you're in your knowing, when you're truly knowing, you're operating as the true self. Yeah. The guides have said every time you've truly had an experience of knowing, a profound sense of knowing, that's been the God within knowing through you. It's not your intellect. Yeah. Knowing, they say, doesn't even have language. You give it language. Yeah. Just the experience of knowing is enough.
Could you maybe highlight one of those moments in your life when you had that complete gnosis of this ever expanding truth and presence and reality?
Well, the first couple of times I got knowing, it did come with language. And it's, this was when I was a rock and roll kid when I was 25. I had, platinum blonde, Billy Idol hair and a lot of leather, and was a bit of a drunk and a bit of a druggie and, a bit of a hot shit. I was having this hot young guy's career going. And, but I found myself at the end of that period praying for the first time. And that's a whole longer story that I'll spare you. But 3 days later, I asked myself what I could do that was positive. And I heard a voice telling me what to do. And when I say I heard a voice, it's not like my ears are involved. It's a thought that overrides all other thoughts, which is really how I channel. Wow. It's kind of like something comes in and your own thoughts just go whoosh to the side and this other thing is at the forefront. Yeah. And I listened to that and my life changed. About a year later, they told me to get out of a room. They don't tell me what to do unless I ask, and I don't even get a lot of personal advice. But I was basically told to end a relationship, and I didn't want to, and I didn't, and I suffered enormously. Had I listened, I think I would have spared myself a couple of years of pain. Yeah. The first experience that I really had, there's this rooftop experience that I had when I was 25, which is what sort of opened me up a bit psychically. It was the harmonic convergence thing. But when I was about 30, I had a maybe 28, 29. Very, very rough period. And I basically thought it wouldn't end. And I was giving up. And I think people were sort of giving up on me as well, because I was just in pain. And when it broke, and again, it was prayer, I had an experience for about 4 days, maybe 3 days, of knowing that I was where I was supposed to be in my life and in the world. And I also knew that everybody else was as well. And this wasn't Pollyanna. I had about 45 cents to my name at that time in my life. I was very poor. And most everything that I thought I could be or would be had fallen apart all around me. My whole sense of self was really somewhat shattered, once I started opening up spiritually. It was a real challenging road. Some of it was my age. Some of it was real changes in behavior, but I literally didn't know who I was in the way that I had. And that was a period of reconstruction. But that period of 3 days of just being on the subways in New York and seeing the beauty in everyone, it was mind-blowing. And it was a preview. I look at it now as a preview. When it ended, I felt terribly betrayed and like I must have screwed up badly and was taken away and maybe I'd done something wrong. But now I think I got a preview, and it was enough to keep me going. I have knowing now frequently. When I read for people, I'm operating in knowing. I'm not trying to figure anything out. There's nothing to figure out. I'm like a radio. That's my job. When I'm channeling, I'm a radio for the guides. If you ask me what's happening with my sister, we're not speaking, and I tune into your sister, I might start to look like her and I'll hear her, and I can also hear you at a higher level, and I can broker a whole conversation, which you can verify, which I like. Because you can't fake that stuff, If I start to look like your grandma, you go, oh, brother, that's her again. Who wants to talk to her? So that's the interesting stuff. But that comes as knowing as well, because I don't have the information or a construct to place those things in. So I have nothing else but my true intuitive nature.
And I think to a certain degree, we've all had glimpses of what you're talking about, of just like, we know something is happening, or
everybody. The guys do this sometimes in their classes, and they'll say, everybody, okay, go to a time in your life when you knew something, and go and close your eyes, remember what it felt like, and everybody can do that. And then they say, okay, now go to something that you think. I think I know what I'm having for dinner tomorrow. I know how long I'm going to live. I think I know what my best friend is doing. It's completely different.
Yeah,
it's completely different. And what I found is when one is in one's knowing, when one truly knows something, there's never a question. When you're in your thinking, there's always a question attached. Nothing wrong with thinking. It's just a different way of operating.
You said the small self thinks and the true self knows.
Yeah.
And I'm really curious around, exploring a little bit, giving people a little bit of that taste of what does stepping into someone actually look like. Would you be open to stepping into my field, maybe giving people?
Yeah, I can try. I mean, I can do it, I think. So the first thing that I do when I step into somebody is I just feel what it's like to be them. That's really all that it is, And then I try to give it language, or I hear, or I give it language that way. And then I usually work with questions after that, So once I'm tuned into you, I can go to your life and the different people and the different experiences. So just let me see. We'll see how the reception is this morning. Just speak your whole name for me, please.
Emilio Ortiz.
Well, you're funny. Because you come through like this. And you present well, but you come through like I'm in charge. And you're doing this, and you're bringing attention to yourself. And I mean, this is what you do, but this is actually very conscious, and it's actually very sort of masculine, like I'm in charge. But the interesting thing about you is as you do that, you get really super receptive. This means congruence, this symbol, but it's soft. Whereas this is like a statement of being, this is how you operate. which is far more, I want to say the energy is fascination. Like you operate with a sense of, you're always figuring it out, but you're pulling things from elsewhere. You're making something of them that you can understand in order to show the world, in order to present. And that seems to be part of the way that you operate. When I go to you, this is your trajectory, which is nice. It's upward, and it's actually pretty rapid and pretty steady. Other people show up like with zigzags. You bounce off one wall, then you go in another direction. Some people have pavers, flagstones that they walk on. You're like straight up. You see if I can hear you at all. You're saying, I have to decide what it means to be myself still. Once I know this, I'm fine. You're saying you're going to be testing the waters for another 6 years. You're saying 6 years, and it's all useful. Like you're going to be dipping your toes, your feet in different ponds until you really fall in. And the funny thing is, I think once you really fall in, you're going to realize it was all the same pond. It was just showing up in different ways. And that for you, because you lick your lips, that's like a really embodied experience. That's a sensual embodiment of being, fully being. You're saying that you're in charge of your life when you understand that nothing that you thought really matters. And then you go, huh? That's when you're in charge. And that has to do with unattachment, yes. But more than that, it's actually what I'm being told is real sovereignty, real awareness of being. And I hear this is a quote, you don't have to absolve yourself of anything anymore. And there's a fair amount, I think, of what you've done in this life that's had to do with absolution and the idea of releasing the self from the past, or the idea of past sins. My guys don't really talk much about that stuff, but that's, I believe, something that you came in with that you're working out. When I go to the challenges with you, they're interesting. Some of it's about the question of like, why do I have to bother? This is you being a little wary. Why do I have to bother? But it is the idea that you're going to rise to the occasion when you do. But when you rise to the occasion, it's not a small act. It's really not minor. I don't get you being bothered by the little stuff. Let me go to you one last way. I mean, you can ask something if you want. But you're saying to me that you don't have to figure yourself out anymore. And when I say that, you're going, huh? And every time I get a jaw drop, that's like the aha stuff. Like you don't have to. They're saying if you want to spend your time doing it, you can. It's not going to happen that way. It's not going to happen through figuring it out. It's going to happen through being. And then you're going to be like, oh, what? Like, what was that? It's huge and useful. And I want to suggest and used well. So whatever you do with this becomes proactive for you. It becomes a source of action in your life. That's how you show up. How you step into somebody, for me, it's really as simple as a radio. I use the name as a coordinate. It's like a radio station. So I just tune into your station. That's it. And then I let myself be receptive to you and as you, And then once I have the person, I can get to the other satellites, I can get to your Jane Smith or your, John Doe, because I'll be tuned in through you and I'll be getting that information. And then I can, it's really useful when there are problems. You right now are just sort of explaining where you were at and how you show up in the world.
Thank you so much for that. I got pretty emotional when you were embodying and speaking. I really felt the energy. And for people that want to have that experience, are you doing readings? Are you doing these types of things for the public?
Yeah, I do still. I mean, I I do a lot of live stream stuff, and I do readings as part of that. The guides come through and teach. They bring through the energy and attune everybody, which is palpable, as you said. So that's exciting because the teachings are always different. And then they take questions. So a fair amount of what's asked are people asking about their private lives. And then I do privates as well, just not as often as I used to.
You mentioned briefly while you were stepping in is that this process of like forgiveness and like, these past sins that have been going on. And I feel a lot of us can relate to that. And in the kingdom, it says something really particular, which is to live something that has been named as darkness or as sin. Evil is not to forgive it. It is to re-know it. How can you guide people to understand this concept of re-knowing something?
I mean, it's a large concept. I'll give you the easiest illustration that I can think of, and then maybe they'll come in. In the Book of Mastery, there's a little teaching it's a meditation where they invite the reader, where they're taking everybody up a mountain and saying, there's a cave, go into the cave. And in that cave is the one person you never want to see again as long as you live. And they say, now you have to walk that person out of the cave. They say, who you put in darkness and what you put in darkness calls you to that darkness, which is a teaching of vibrational accord. They say ACCORD or ACHORD as on a piano, which is your resonant tone is in alignment to that. To release them from the cave isn't to make it okay that they hurt you or hurt other people. It's not about that. It's about releasing yourself from the binding to that. They say again and again and again in their teachings, you can't be the light and hold another in darkness. It's just not possible. It's not possible. They say it's the hypocrisy of religion again and again and again, that some are favored, some are not, some are going to go to heaven. It's ridiculous stuff. So let's just ask the question, how do you deal with the darkness? I mean, how did you speak? How did you say it the first time?
How do you guide people into this process of re-knowing instead of like, forgiveness and putting things into darkness? And
it's not about fixing things. It's about re-seeing what has been. It's about re-seeing what has been from a higher view, the acts of one who's operating in fear. The acts of one who is operating in fear to the detriment of others is understood by the common reality, but it's not remedied there. But it is not remedied there. You would have done it already. If you could have, you would have done it already. If you could have, to go to the higher and see the divine that must exist in that human being, to go to the higher and see the divine that must exist as that human being is to re-know the human being as of God, is to re-know the human being as of God. This is not placating an idea. It's actually resurrecting the aspect of them. It is actually resurrecting the aspect of them that is divine and has always been and has always been. This is the process of lifting the upper room. This is the process of lifting to the upper room. You cannot lift the evil man to the upper room. You cannot lift the evil man to the upper room because you have made him evil, because you have made him evil. And you've aligned to that idea of who they are, and you have aligned to that idea of who they are. And in your condemnation, you have condemned yourself as well. You have condemned yourself as well, period. And they're saying period.
One practice that was in, I think it was the Book of Mastery, was, and I recommend people to do this, is go for a walk, and every person you see, like, look into their eyes and say, I see the divine in you. And I think that's like training or practice to, it's a new worldview. It's we're not used to seeing people like that. Like, we'll see them and then we'll judge them by what they're wearing, or the haircut that they have, or the way they're walking, or the way they're speaking. And like, that's identifying them with their form and their personality self. And this is a whole different way of walking in the world. It's fascinating.
It's really interesting to do it. When I do workshops, the guides do that with all the students, but sometimes they step into me really fully. and they look at everybody, and it's like, oh, it's mind blowing.
And you feel that, and you're feeling that.
Yeah. And my eyes, I'm told my eyes turn very blue when that happens.
Yeah.
I have no hazel eyes, but everybody looks just beautiful and just as they are. It's not about what it's old stuff, who we think another's supposed to be is born in our idea of who we are, has nothing to do with them at all. It's what we're projecting. And when you move beyond some of those things, you move beyond the mask that we show up with, or the faulty view. So, everybody's choosing how they show up in the world in one way or another. There's nothing wrong with that. But to see beyond that is to move to essence and the divine that is showing up as them. And it's beautiful to see, but you can really, again, you feel the energy. There's no way around it.
And how long do those moments last for you when that happens?
It's like being in love when it happens, And when I start thinking about it or picking it apart, I fall away from it. When the guides step into me to do what they do, I'm surrendering at a different level. And then they're literally facing every person and working with them at that level of vibration, but they'll have the whole room do it too. And it lasts as long as people are willing, truthfully, to step outside of the idea of how they should be seen and what they should see based on who they were told they were. I mean, most of what we're in pain from is our own ideas of history. I was the chubby gay kid that got beaten up at school. I carried that a long time. So it's not how I operate in the world, but it's certainly informed it for many, many years. And to move beyond that idea of self was an enormous leap for me. Enormous, because that colored how I saw other people, which was everybody was a potential threat. So when you move beyond these ideas, and they're really, the guides say they're all just ideas, and you stop giving them enormous power, everything starts to shift. You're not denying your past. You're not denying somebody's capacity for harm. You're not pretending that they don't have a gun when they have a gun. It's not that. But it is about seeing the inherent divine. And again, what's already there. You can't make anything holy. It already is, but we can deny it, and we do.
Yeah.
And, when you deny the divine in somebody, they say you deny it in yourself, and that's the problem we face.
Yesterday, we had a fascinating conversation with Dr. Dean Radin. He's a researcher. He studies psychic phenomenon. Yeah. And, one thing I wanted to ask you, because I have this so present in my mind from yesterday's conversation, is as humanity is going through this evolution, will we be seeing more people have their psychic abilities turned on?
Yes. I mean, I get it all the time. I'm just a way shower. I'm not that special. Yes is the answer to that, because it's part of who we are, and it's part of opening up to the senses. I mean, when what I do, I suspect, is just simply telepathic. When I tune into somebody's girlfriend or boyfriend or parent, and I'm hearing them, we're not using language. I may be the vibration is translated into language for me, but that's a capacity that we have. And all I sort of do is show up and say, it's available. Dean was there the very first time I channeled publicly at Esalen, which is before there were any books, and I was invited. I was very nervous. I was an NYU college teacher. I was doing this in my living room for a few people for many years, and I got invited to channel at Esalen at a symposium on the paranormal. And I remember because he taught me something, because in those days I thought if I was stepping into somebody in China, I was traveling to China to do it. And he said, you're not traveling to China, you're working, basically, he explained, you're working beyond time in the inner planes. It's a different construct. I didn't know the physics. I didn't know who anybody was. I was just figuring they were going to throw me out because, who the hell was I? to be there. But it was because of that conference that the first book and all of the books went into print. So it was an enormously important weekend. Let me ask if the guides want to talk about people opening up. It's happened already. People just don't know yet. I hear it's happened already. People just don't know it yet. It's as if the water is running, but you haven't turned the faucet on to know that it works. So people have to open up and explore it in order for it to be present. None of this stuff, I think, happens much without our permission. I think will is used in this way. I don't recommend that people try to be a channel. Channeling, as I do it, is really straight stenography. The psychic work is a little different because it requires interpretation. But I do think that more and more people are clairsentient than they think or know, which is just feeling energy and knowing what it's like when you walk into a room and knowing what it feels like to be somebody else, which really requires that one develop the qualities of empathy and compassion to succeed with this. You can't do it if you're judging the other person. You'll shut right off. And I didn't know what clairvoyance was. Even when I was clairvoyant, I expected it was something else, and the ability to access information visually is something that people also do. The guy who's working on my house, this old guy, looks out at my yard and he sees what it's supposed to be like, and he's right. He just knows it. He wouldn't call himself psychic, but he's getting the full picture in his head and the dimensions of it. And that's how he's built. So it's just another way of accessing information that's really, I think, a combination of all of the senses operating in a higher way.
Yeah. And for you, they turned on, around in your 30s. And it was when you decided to stop smoking and drinking. That's really interesting because, maybe it's part of that opening up to the senses, and maybe these things like alcohol or nicotine, maybe they make us in a lower density instead of opening up to our psychic abilities.
I was just really sensitive, and I have done everything that one can do to try not to be, and that include drinking too much. So I started opening up psychically and spiritually when I was 25. The voice that I heard at 25 was the first time told me to stop, and that surprised me. But I did because I was so startled by it. And I stayed stopped for now 35 years. And when I was 48, I was a 4-pack-a-day smoker. I would channel and smoke out the window. That's how I did it. And I actually was told at that time that if the guides wanted to continue working with me, but I needed to stop in order for them to do so. And when I stopped, that's when the lectures started.
Yeah.
And I didn't realize how much I was impeding. And the first book was channeled within a year after that, and then, 9 more right after. So that was about my letting go of some of the obstructions to being able to participate at this level. Other people are different. Some people can have a glass of wine and smoke a cigarette. I'm not opposed to it. I just know that my system is odd, and I don't know how I'm wired up energetically to be able to do what I do. I was sitting in a group of people for 18 years in my apartment, doing this once a week, sometimes 3 people, sometimes 10 people. They put $10 in a basket. I wasn't looking to be known for this or get a career for it. It just happened once the book started. But I feel when I look back at that time that I was being trained and I was apprenticing. The guides were working with me to develop me to do the work that I do now. And had I known that was what was happening, I might not have done it.
Yeah.
I wasn't expecting this. I'm grateful, but I wasn't expecting it.
And to a certain degree, this isn't the first lifetime that you've been working with the guides. I've heard you explain that there has been previous agreements that you and the guides have had. Have you ever tuned in to a past lifetime where you've been working with these guides as, maybe another time in humanity or?
Yeah, I know of one. I didn't connect it to that, but I was on jury duty. I must have been about 33 or something, and I was looking forward to jury duty. I'd never done it, and I began to melt down in the court. I was terrified every day I went in there. I couldn't figure it out. I kept thinking, I'm not on trial. And they gave me a name I mean, was meditating a lot in those days. I kept hearing a name, and I thought they were telling me it sounded like an Italian restaurant that I used to eat. I think, why am I hearing this? And they said, go look it up. And this was pre-internet. So I found a book and I looked up the name, and he was a writer and philosopher who had been before the Inquisition for years, was on trial, and then was later killed. And I'd had dreams about this person without knowing who it was. And it wasn't until the internet, when I decided to look him up on Wikipedia, that I saw I saw two figures in the dream that I'd had. And it was, that time. And what that person was teaching at that time was the universality of all religions. It probably wasn't a lot different. And he was, doing, they were all messing. They were all, messing with alchemy in those days, I think. And I don't know. So, yeah, I suspect that that's true. And I suspect that most of those lifetimes didn't come to a very good end. And I've been assured that this lifetime, nobody's going to, come and get me. And I'm knocking wood that that's true, because I didn't want to sign up for that one again.
Yeah. Yeah. Because a lot of these teachings, it feels like they're teachings of Christ, and they use a lot of that terminology in the teachings.
Yeah.
And it's fascinating because it's like bringing it to a new era of humanity instead of using like the language that was maybe used in those times. It's more like modernizing it a little bit and bringing it in a new light for people now to co-resonate with that teaching.
They're reclaiming it. I understand that, and they're trying to bring it back to its intended meaning. They defined the Christ in the very first book. What the principle of the Christ is, they say it's the aspect of the Creator that can be realized in form. It's the divine spark within everybody. Sometimes they call it the monad. Now more than they call it the Christ, they use the term monad or the word monad. But yeah, and I'm comfortable with it now. When I first started doing this, people used to write and said, tell your guides to use other language. It's going to turn people off. And I said, I'm a channel. I don't get to choose language. It doesn't really work that way. The books are literally the transcriptions of lectures. I think maybe 3 words may be corrected in any manuscript because I stumbled over it when I was speaking, or it was coming too fast. But that's about it. It's what's given.
Yeah.
And that's what it's got to be if I'm going to stay in my integrity with this.
Yeah. Some of the last questions I had for you before we wrap up, it's like, I wanted to ask you the way that you channel. I was looking into like old YouTube videos and seeing you channel in the past. And I've seen how before, a couple of years ago, the guides came in with more of like an accent and more theatrical maybe. Does it depend on the day? Because I feel like now it's evolved where it's much more, it's like your voice. I was really curious about that. I wanted to know.
It's changed. When I first started, I used to work on my feet because there was so much energy running through, but with my eyes would be closed, people would have to sit in a circle and I'd almost like fall over them. It wasn't safe. And then I learned to sit down only when people wanted to start filming the channelings. I literally had to stay in the chair. In the earliest videos, I'm rocking like I'm, rocking. It's ridiculous, And I don't do that much anymore. The accent still shows up sometimes, and I actually am happy when it does. It's the guide with the British accent. He likes to hear himself talk, and whenever that one comes through, I get to sit back and relax. I'm just like, this one's going to I'm not going to worry about a thing, and I don't have to. There was a whole book that was dictated in that voice. And I understand that it's a collective.
It's collective.
Group. Yeah, it's a collective. So I think different of them present differently. But oddly, when you read the books, it's all consistent. There's one guide who comes through, Book of Truth, I think, was done in that voice, that used the word deers, which drives me crazy because I don't like the word. So we would like you to know deers. I'm like, oh. But that doesn't happen much. But no, the guide with the British accent, he still, or it still shows up. And I wondered when that first started if that wasn't a way to create more of a difference for me in my own speech and my own experience, so that I would trust it more. There was a sense of otherness that allowed me to rest into it. But I also get that that's the way they speak. So this is how it's coming to me. When I've seen that guide, and I've only seen him a few times, he's
seen him
remarkable.
in physical form.
Clairvoyantly, yeah.
Wow.
3 times. And I think if I was still meditating all the time, it could happen much more frequently. But once was under hypnosis, the other 2 times were in meditation. And he always appears sort of the same and is remarkable looking to me. He's got those
human form.
Human form, yeah. A long white beard and a big hat. That's like, it looks almost like the Greek Orthodox priests would wear. It's a tall thing with like a flat top, like you'd see at a graduation, and a robe, and these beautiful eyes with so much compassion. I mean, it's unbelievable, and he's funny. I was channeling once at Esalen, and I was having a disagreement with somebody who kept trying to get me to defend what I do and how I did it. And, I went to a meditation that somebody else was holding. I don't want to go to this, but I'll go to this. And this woman did this long meditation that I hated. I was like, oh, no, it's going on forever. And she was saying, now you go down a mountain, into a ravine. You're laying by a stream. It took 10 minutes to get to the damn stream. I was so fed up. And then she said, and now your guide is going to join you. And I'm thinking, yeah, right. And then bang, I saw this guy, the same one with the weird, barreling down the hill, carrying these 2 scrolls like the Torah.
Wow.
And he said, stop trying to explain to other people who you are. You don't know. And then went right back up the hill. I was flabbergasted. It was the best thing he could have said. But he'd been bothered. He'd been summoned down the hill in this meditation. So anyway.
They're these wisdom teachers, for humanity, and that's incredible. I wanted just to let people know that right now you're undergoing this trilogy of manifestation, and the new book Resurrections. I believe you already started the audio recording.
It's all recorded.
What can you tell us about what we can expect in that trilogy or in that book for people that want to dive deeper?
It's really new, and they are talking more about the world and how it works in manifestation, a somewhat different way than I suspect others are talking about it, and the trajectory that we seem to be on now. It's quite alive, and it's quite challenging, I have to say. But it's not a bad entry point for people that are new to my work, and new to the teachings of the guides, because the guides say they teach in a one-room schoolhouse, so they bring everybody in, at whatever level that they're at. But yeah, I don't remember most of it. I did the audiobook. That's where I actually read it. I went, whoa, this is wild.
Yeah.
But they're talking about time and the construct of time and how things are created and then recreated, and how to be who we truly are in a much more, I think, expressed way. And expressed means manifested. So it's not a self-help book.
Yeah. Paul, I've deeply loved this conversation. Just to leave people off, where can they find you, learn more about you? Where would you send people to get to know your work on a deeper level?
To the website. It's just my name, paulselig.com, and everything's there. There's book links and workshop links and live stream links and lots of free stuff and lectures and things like that.
And to end every single episode, we have final trio, 3 rapid fire questions that you can answer in a word, or you can answer however long you want. But the first one is, what's the best advice that the guides have given you?
Stop being so frightened. Really.
Yeah. is there any final messages that you and or the guys would like to leave us today? The purpose of this show is to become that bridge for the next generations of leaders that will be inheriting the upper room and leading this new era. So is there any final nuggets of wisdom that you would like to leave us with today?
I'm going to let them do it. We don't say one thing. We only want to say one thing. If you tell yourself you're wrong, if you tell yourself you're wrong, you will find yourself wrong all the time. You will find yourself wrong all the time. You give permission to know yourself. If you give permission to know yourself as you're worthy, as you are worthy in your true worth, it will come to you. It will come to you without fail. Without fail, there is no one left behind finally. There is no one left behind finally. Your willingness is key. Your willingness is key if you make the claim. If you make the claim, I know who I am in truth. I know what I am in truth. I know how I serve in truth. You will awaken as you wish. You will awaken as you wish.
God is, God is, God is.
That's the big one, yeah.
Paul, guys, thank you guys so much for showing up today, giving us all of these blessings and wisdom. I highly appreciate this conversation. I would love to continue the conversation and do this again sometime. And thank you just for being who you are and showing up in the world as you do.
You're a delight. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you, brother.